Hello everybody. I have been editing this video since the new year started, to be honest, and we are finally here. It ends very abruptly because by that point I have been filming for like 2 hours, but honestly, if you make your way through this entire 30-minute video, congratulations. See you hopefully sooner than the past 2 months have been in a non-live talking about Bridgerton, because that is the next video I plan to film. But yeah, we got here. We did it. I'm very proud of myself.
So I was filming for 20 minutes and then I realized my camera wasn't recording, so I had to switch cameras. I'm filming this before work, and now I have significantly less time to talk about all these books, but I'm still gonna try to do it. Hey, roll this page, welcome back to my channel, and today I am going to be going through all of the books that I read in 2020. I'm gonna be tier ranking them. It just seemed like the easiest way to talk about all these books. I'm not gonna be going through all of the synopses because there are 52 books to talk about, and I don't have the time. So let's go through my tier list. So here are all 52 books that I read this year. Some of them I enjoyed, some of them I didn't, and we're gonna get into it. This note won't necessarily be in the order that I read the books in. It'll just be as I go. If there's an author and I read multiple of their books, I'll just talk about them all at once. As far as my tier goes, there's a lot of TikTok references in this because TikTok took up a lot of my year in 2020 and it still takes up a lot of my brain space. At the bottom we have Where with Who, which was like earlier in the year.
Where? Who? You been where? Where who?
But this is for the books where I literally don't remember reading them or don't remember any significant details because they clearly didn't leave an impact on me. Just above that, we have Please Leave Me Alone, We're Sleeping.
Please leave me alone, we are sleeping.
I remember some details about it, but I don't plan on reading more from the author, or I just don't plan to continue whatever the series is. Solidly in the middle, we have I Got Issues by is that Julia song that everybody was singing at some point. I liked the book pretty much. It was like a solid middle book. It was neither good nor bad. Our good tier is Busset because one, I love that challenge, and two, I feel like it represents how the book changed my mood. My mood was crusty, I wasn't feeling it, and then suddenly I had serotonin. And finally, no surprise after that last description, we have top tier, Cured My Seasonal Affective Disorder, which does not need explanation. It just means that book really brought me joy. First up, we have the Selection Series by Kira Cass, which we read for Household Book Club. I feel like a lot of these books are going to be book club books because that was primarily the reason I read so much last year was because I was in 2 book clubs and those people held me accountable. The Selection Series we read because we were looking for serotonin. We were looking for Head Empty No Brain kind of reading after we had just finished like a more literary book, and we decided on Selection because it was an old classic in YA like booktube. I think I'm gonna put this in Please Leave Me. Well, I know where I put this because we've already filmed this part, but I put it in Please Leave Me Alone, We're Sleeping because I have now read this series twice. I was basically torturing myself by rereading the series, but I knew that you could not understand the full scope of what Kira Cass is trying to do if you didn't read all 3 books back to back. Next up, we have Jacob Ross's The Bone Readers, which was one of my more recent reads. We read this for Bashment Book Club. I put it in Please Leave Me Alone, We Are Sleeping because I still remember a lot of the details because it was such a recent read, but I don't plan on reading any more crime fiction because this showed me I don't like the tropes in crime fiction that make it what the genre is currently, and 2, those tropes exacerbate stereotypes about the Caribbean. I read it in one day, but not because it was impossible to put down, it was because I had to read it for book club. Next up we have Alyssa Cole. I'm just going to do all of her books together. She was a standout author for last year for me. I discovered her in February because we read A Princess in Theory for Bashment Book Club and then proceeded to read the other 2 novels in the Reluctant Royal series. I've saved the novellas for this year just in case. Well, not just in case because at this point shit has gone down again. But for those serotonin boosts again, I saved those other 2 books in that series specifically. So we'll just go through all the books I read by her this year. I read 5 books by her, all on audio because whoever does her narration is fantastic and definitely is behind the reason why I read so many audiobooks this year because it made me realize, oh hey, you can actually focus on audiobooks if you're actually interested in the story. So A Princess in Theory I would put in Busset because it was revolutionary to discover Alyssa Cole and she did change my mood when I was reading her, especially with those tornado tongue things. A Duke by Default is Cured My Seasonal Affective Disorder level because the choking scene in that took me right by surprise and I merely chopped off a limb. The third book in that series is A Prince on Paper. This goes back to Busset. This is like the least steamy of them, which was a change. Its female protagonist is a virgin, which is why there are hardly any sex scenes in this book. But I did like the romance between the two characters. I thought it was cute because like the guy was like very teasing and she was like very shy and serious. How to Catch a Queen. This goes in I got issues tier for me just because I didn't connect with it. I don't know what it is about when a couple is already like married or something and we start with that at the beginning of a romance book. It just, my interest wanes. There isn't that element of when are they gonna get together, because they are already together. It's just they're not communicating. Especially in this book, they do like a friends with benefits situation for a very long time and they're getting along. It just, there was a lack of conflict for me in the relationship itself because it was outside external forces that were keeping them apart for the most part. I still really enjoyed it and I'm obviously going to read every single book that she writes, but yeah, that one was like just a little bit lower than the other ones. And then finally we have When No One Is Watching, which is, it wasn't Busset at first, but it went up to seasonal affective disorder because I realized it was the reading experience that brought me so much joy, because me and my friend Hannah, who I'm doing the Barnes Babes book club with this year, because I need another book club to do, we buddy read it, like we were reading at the same time. So we were like texting each other while we were reading it, which was a great experience, especially because we were like, remember James Baldwinning each other when we would start shipping two of the characters. And we were like, I don't know if I should ship them because he might turn out to be bad. Like it was just an experience, and it made me realize like, maybe I will like thrillers if they're written for me as an audience and not white upper middle class women like most thrillers are written for. Dear Haiti, Love Elaine was a book that we read for Bashment Book Club. I think this is a I got issues book for me. There was an element of it where the protagonist was sent to the Caribbean as a punishment, and I always find that trope kind of tired because it makes it seem like because the Caribbean is so like behind or underdeveloped, it is a punishment for somebody to be sent there by their parents. And that trope, I don't really enjoy it. I do like the author's writing style though. I do plan to read more books from them. Someone Who Will Love You and All Your Damaged Glory was read pre-COVID, but like barely pre-COVID. I read this on my way to LA in January, which it doesn't feel like that actually happened. That feels fake in my brain at this point. I could not stop reading. Usually on planes, I have a hard time paying attention. I'll like get bored of reading and I will want to watch a film or I'll want to sleep or just listen to music. But this book, I could not put it down. And I wasn't even alone on the plane. I was with my friend and I finished this book like halfway through the flight. Like we still had time to like play games on the like little computer system and stuff, but I really enjoyed this collection of short stories. Like if you like Sally Rooney and you're like a basic literary bitch like me, you would enjoy this collection. It's very in the vein of like moody about love as a millennial dating and the hellscape kind of book. There was a short story about a dog that made me cry. Yeah, this was a Busset for me because even though it was like a sad read, it brought me so much serotonin because that was one of the first books that I like binge read this year. And it was at a time where I had very little time to read because of work, because of commuting and all this stuff. I did not have a lot of motivation to read at that point, and I wasn't sure if I was going to continue BookTube because I just felt like I didn't have the time. And yeah, it set the tone for my reading for the year, I think. I just really enjoyed it. And it's like the kind of book I would recommend to people for sure. Set Fire to the Gods was another house salt pick. I think this is a I got issues book because I didn't really like the plot. The characters were unmemorable, but the world building is what got me. I want to read more in the series because we're gonna see more of the world in the second book, and I think it's a duology, which great. It wasn't like amazing, but it took away a couple hours of 2020 and I was lost in another story and that's all I can really ask for. Rosie Dadman's The Roommate. This book is definitely an I got issues book. The thing that always comes to mind when I read this, and I was talking to my friends about it, the author, either she's American living in the UK or like, I feel like she was born in America but lives in the UK now, but you could tell the author was British because of the writing. There's just like certain tells with the writing style, with turns of phrases, that an author is British. And as soon as I started this one, I was like, oh, yeah, I could tell. Like, so I checked like the bio of the author because I was like, this person is not American, or like at least has not been to America in a very long time, because nobody in their 20s would speak this way. That took me out of the story for like at least the first 100 pages. I just kept focusing on the writing. I couldn't, like, it just distracted me that the writing was like this. But eventually I got into the story and it was like spicy, and it focused on the porn industry, which is something I hadn't read about before. It wasn't like the top tier level like romances that I read this year, but I will be reading more from the author. I think I'm going to check out her second book. I think I saw it on like our work app that I'll just pick up at some point when I want to read another romance that's more contemporary. Next up, we have Deadly Education. A lot of issues with it that were brought up by people who were represented by the book. I was only reading it from the biracial perspective, which there were some issues that I found with it. Definitely, this is like a I got issues book for me. Like, obviously there are issues in this book. I enjoyed some elements of it. The romance of it was what made it so endeared to me when I read it the first time, because I read this twice. I read it before it came out, and then I read it for House Salt Book Club as well. The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. This was the first Christina Lauren book I read ever, and also the first of this year, because I've read 2. The Unhoneymooners was great. It was cured my seasonal affective disorder great, I would say. I read this on the way to Mexico, and it was like the perfect way to set the tone of just like having good vibes, good times. It was the second romance I read this year, and it solidified for me that maybe I should be reading more romance. Maybe it'll bring me more serotonin. Next up, we have Talia Hibbert, which I've read 3 books by her this year. She was a later in the year read for me because in the beginning of the year, I was mostly reading Alyssa Cole, and then everybody was talking about the Brown sisters, and I decided, like, this is the next romance series I want to try. Filming in the morning clearly is not a thing for me because I just had to change my battery, which has never happened for me for filming. I was talking about Talia Hibbert and how I discovered her this year as well. This was just like a great year of discovering romance that I enjoyed. So I bought Get a Life, Chloe Brown, and Take a Hint, Danny Brown together, like, later in the year. I think there's like a vlog clip of me buying it during my writing week, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna read these immediately, and I did. I read every book that I hauled in that video, which is really good for me. I finished Get a Life, Chloe Brown. I think that one for me is like bust it because it did bring me some serotonin. Actually, okay, so I read the 2 Brown sister books, and I think Chloe Brown's was my favorite so far. It might get bumped down by Eve when that one comes out. Take a Hint, Danny Brown was just below that. I really enjoyed it once I got into the characters, but it wasn't as strong of a start for me. I think, again, the same thing with How to Catch a Queen, because Zaf was so into her from the beginning and there was no tension there. It was like Danny figuring out that he was into her. That took some enjoyment out of it for me. I know it's like the favorite for a lot of people, but for me, it just something about that situation. I like tension, I like angst in my stories. The 3rd book I read by Talia Hibbert was Wrapped Up in You, which was an exclusive for Kobo. It was a novella that she wrote for Christmas, and it is definitely 100% in the sad tier for me, because that shit, I spent one morning reading it and I was so happy. I want to read it again. Like, it was like anything remarkable, but it was exactly what I was in the mood for at the time. And it was at a time where I was like, I'm not getting to go home for Christmas, I'm having to stay in Canada, and it made me forget about that for a couple hours, which I was very thankful for. Next up, we have The Glass Hotel, which was a House Salt pick. This was very well written. I would put it in the Busset area. I enjoyed it while I read it. It felt like I read something that was art, if that makes sense. But I wouldn't say it was like high up on the serotonin levels. It's not a serotonin inducing book. It was just very pretty, and it gave us like a really great discussion, which was like, I really liked talking about it with my friends. A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor. Immediately sad tier level of reading experience for me. I really liked An Absolutely Remarkable Thing when I read it in 2019, and so I was very excited when this book came out and read it fairly soon after its release, I'm pretty sure, and it was everything I needed it to be. It was so smart and felt so relevant in ways that obviously Hangry probably wasn't anticipating it would be. I really enjoyed the hopefulness of this book because we were really lacking hope in 2020, and it was exactly what I needed to read at the time, and I love this series, and I'm trying to make Hannah read it. If you would like to join me in bullying Hannah into reading the series, let me know and I will sign you up for this task. I discovered Jasmine Guillory in 2019 because we published her at work, and so I picked up a couple of her books. This year her new book was Party of Two, and this was an I Got Issues book for me. Jasmine's never, I don't think I've read a book by Jasmine Guillory that gets me up to busset level where like my serotonin is thriving, but it is always an entertaining read. I said in a previous video where I talked about this book that I feel like her writing is improving as she continues, and I love seeing that because it means like books in the future I'm more inclined probably to enjoy because you can see the progress in the author's craft. Some people find the opposite because as Jasmine writes more books, it becomes like the plot itself and like the character development becomes better and like the character like conflict becomes better. It's not necessarily rooted in the romance anymore, which I don't generally mind. I like reading books that have a like romance in it, but maybe it's not like everything you're reading about. It's not the primary focus, and that's definitely what her books are becoming. So some people don't like that, some people do it. I just fall into the do camp. I don't know how I'd feel about it after everything that's happened recently, because it is about a politician who is more liberal leaning, but I don't know. Something about that probably wouldn't sit right with my soul at this point, but when I read it, it's an I Got Issues book. The Invisible Life of Addy Larue. As strange as it is to say, it cured my seasonal affective disorder because it is such a sad book. It is a book that I feel comfortable recommending. Like my friend who doesn't read often just asked me for a reading recommendation, and I suggested this one just because I trust the writing style to be able to like translate to a bunch of different audiences. I really enjoy this story. It was like a commercial version of The Starless Sea, which leans a little more literary because that is what Erin Morgenstern writes, but this took V.E. Schwab's ability to write what we call crossover appealing fiction. So like fiction that is in the adult section but would have a crossover appeal to a YA audience. She took that style of writing, elevated just slightly, and then it became one of my favorite reads of 2020. I think like of my sad tier level reading, A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor, Invisible Life of Addy Larue, and When No One Is Watching are like up there. They're like the reads of the year that I was like, these are the books I will recommend to people. Also, for the audiobook for Invisible Life, the person who narrates did a stellar voice for Darkness. Like, still thinking about it. I've been talking about this like since I read that book. But like, maybe don't. My First We're With Who. It's a graphic like comic collection of like about dating, and I think I read it like at a point where I was behind on my reading goal for the year, and when I still was like, oh, I can catch up because it's only like 1 or 2 books, and I picked this one up because it was quick and I could read it through work, and it was okay. I sped through it. I don't really remember any of it. Okay, next up we have the first Bridgerton romance novel that I've read. I say first because now I'm doing a whole video on that series, so I've read way more. Julia Quinn's romancing Mr. Bridgerton, which is the story about Penelope and Colin, who were the trope of tropes that I love, which is like brothers, like friend's brother, and you've always had a crush on him. Like nothing that happened to me in real life, so I don't know why that trope like hits, but it hits. It's an I Got Issues. I feel like all of Julia Quinn's books, like that series, is an I Got Issues series because there are certain tropes in Regency romance that just do not work with me, and every time I read them, and like the inherent racism in being historically accurate, there's some things that I read and I'm like, you really could have just left this out. It did not add anything to the scene. So there's certain elements of the story that I don't like. The romance aspect of it hits every time. For the most part, I'm talking about the whole series instead of just this book. This book was an I Got Issues book. There were some things I didn't like about it, but generally it is my favorite of the Bridgerton series. Like, of all the ones I've read by this point, this is my favorite one. Aisha at Last was a busset level book for me. It gave me some serotonin. I read it for the Read-A-thon that Kayla does for Books and Lala, and it was the first book that I read for that week, and it really set the mood and made me want to read more because I enjoyed it so much. The author has another book coming out this year, and I'm so excited to read it. Like, I cannot wait. She has like such good comps. I think the one coming out is like a You've Got Mail comp, which means I have to watch You've Got Mail because I've never watched it. This is the whole thing my boss is like aghast about, is that I haven't watched You've Got Mail. But this one is a Pride and Prejudice comp, and you know how I feel about Pride and Prejudice, so of course I really liked it. Next up we have Kevin Kwon, Sex and Vanity. I really liked the Crazy Rich Asian series. My enjoyment of the series went down the further I read into it. I think it just started, especially the third book, focused on characters that I wasn't really interested in, but Kevin's style is like, I have to read it a specific way because he's very superfluous with his descriptions of things, and I've just learned to skim those parts. Those do not add any element to the story for me. So this was definitely an I got issues book. It was like a middle tier read. I enjoyed it while I read it. I was able to have like complex thoughts about the book and actually do a full review of it with like elements of the story that I really enjoyed that I felt were deeper than his original series was. Kevin Kwan is like a summer read for me. Like his books, I want to be by a pool reading his books. I just love the escapist element of it because it is set in such a surreal world of wealth that most people will never achieve. That yeah, it's an escapist read, and I enjoyed it for what it was. In a Holidays by Christina Lauren. We spoke about this for our final Household Book Club of the year, and it's an I Got Issues book. It was not Unhoneymooners level, but it had the trope of like the brother, like the friends to lovers trope that I really, really like. And I was set it in the holiday season, which I really, really liked. There were elements of it where like I was confused about who I was supposed to be shipping. It wasn't until we were stuck in like her final timeline that I finally got into the characters and was able to enjoy the story. So there are elements of it that were like hard to read, but it was a Christmas story and it was what I wanted to read on Christmas. So middle tier. Enjoyed it. Probably wouldn't read it again. And next we have Zadie Smith's Intimations, which is, I think, not sad level. I think it's like busset level. This is one of the final books I read in 2020. It wasn't the final book I finished. It just took me by surprise, honestly. Like, I had never read Zadie Smith before, so I didn't know what to expect. But this was like a shorter book, and I was like, I can get through this. And it was about the pandemic and just thoughts she wrote down while the pandemic was happening earlier in the year, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I thought, like, I know I want to go read her fiction because I'm like, she has such a beautiful way of like examining the world and phrasing things, and I would recommend reading this. If you might need some distance from the pandemic to be able to like enjoy it, like some people might need that, but I felt seen and like, okay, I'm not the only one having these thoughts. I'm not the only one, like, you feel so insular in your struggle sometimes going through like being indoors all the time and not being able to see, like all of that kind of stuff feels like an insular experience because you are alone for the majority of the time. But this made me remember like we are literally collectively going through this, and I don't know how to describe it. I just really enjoyed this, and it's one of those books I do think I'm going to reread in the future. Next up we have The Damned. This is the second book in the, I'm hoping it's a trilogy. I don't know if it's going to be like whatever you call 4 books in a series. This is an I Got Issues book for me, which makes me very sad because I was hoping it would be a busset level book, because the first book was a busset level book for me. The Beautiful was just angsty romance with a sprinkle of magic. There were no vampires in that book, I'm convinced. They read like witches and wizards to me when I read it. They read like they did magic. They didn't read like vampires. But this book was like, oh no bitch, they vampires. But then the romance sort of fell back, and like that's what I was reading it for. So it was kind of disappointing. I'm still gonna continue on the series because I'm a completionist. I need to know what happens. I like the characters, but while I was reading the book I was like, this is not what I was anticipating, and that might be a me thing. I shouldn't put my expectations on a book. But arguably when you're writing a series, you are setting up expectations with the first book, and my expectations as a reader of that first book were not met. The next up is The Best Laid Plans by Cameron Lund. It was okay. It's like an I Got Issues book because there were certain elements of it where I was like, okay, we're supposed to be like, it's supposed to be an empowering like romance read about like virginity and sex and being a teenager, which like it was, but also there were elements of the book that played into the tropes it was trying to combat, and that was like the issue I had with the book. Overall it was an okay read. Like the creepy college guy element of it wasn't the biggest fan of, but it did its part in the book. The character was 18, so there's really nothing I could say about this. It's like I would read another Cameron Lund book. Did not find this one wholly against my taste, but it did what it had to do for me at that point in time. But next up we have Heartberries, and that is a busset level book for me. These tiers are hard for these kinds of reads because they are more serious. This is a nonfiction essay collection from an Indigenous author here in Canada. It's been out for a couple of years. I don't know if I think it's been published in the US as well, but the writing was beautiful. I still think about it sometimes, and it just was such a complex portrayal of like the ways in which the Canadian systems, like, continue to fail Indigenous people in this country. And on that theme, I will also talk about a history of my brief body, which for me goes into cured my seasonal affective disorder. Again, weird for this one because it's not like a serotonin inducing read, but literally the most beautiful book I read this year. The writing of this is unparalleled because Billy Ray Belcourt is a poet, and you can tell from this writing. I'm not smart enough for reading this book. I realize like there's so much I still have left to educate myself on, and I feel like this is a book I'm going to be returning to time and time again as I get more context, as I gain more knowledge. Sorcery of Thorns was a book that we read for Household Book Club. First book we read for Household Book Club, I'm pretty sure. This is a Please Leave Me... This is an I Got Issues book. Is it an I Got Issues book? Yeah, because it's middle tier. It's like, I can't think of any issues specifically that I have with this book. But actually, no. This is a Please Leave Me Alone, We Are Sleeping book because I barely remember anything from it. I remember elements of the story that I really enjoyed, and I do like the author. I have no strong thoughts about it. Like, I think about it and I think fondly of certain elements of it. But what are those elements? Could not tell you. But it wasn't a bad read. It just... I clearly have lost interest in that book. I really enjoyed it at the time, and then I lost interest. So Please Leave Me Alone, We Are Sleeping. I was interested at the time, and now I'm not. Homebody by Ruby Kaur. This is an I Got Issues book. There was one section of it that I feel like that always happens with Ruby's like poetry collections. There's always one section of it that I feel I really enjoy, and then the other parts of it, like, I don't enjoy quite as much, and that happened again with this series. It's hard to discuss poetry collections. I feel like I'm not personally equipped to discuss them, but so like all I can really say is like it's a middle tier book for me. It was a read. I still like the second collection more, I think. But My Friend Anna, I feel like it's a I Got Issues book. It was good for what it was. I remember reading the original news article and being really interested in it and wanting to read this book. Some of the things the author wrote about were so rooted in a place of privilege that, like, not the level of privilege that Anna was obviously inspiring to, but there was a privileged element to the story that I just sometimes would exacerbate me. And I put it down for a very long time. The writing's very compelling, but I think it's because the story is compelling. I didn't like the way the author would drop in all these, like, because she works for Vanity Fair, she would drop in all these random, like, tidbits that we really didn't need to know for the, like, sake of the story. It was more like a, look at this cool thing I'm doing, look at this cool person I'm meeting. Like, that part of it I really didn't enjoy. Red, White, and Royal Blue is a bust-it level book for me, if I can get up there. I really enjoyed this read. It was hopeful in a time when I wasn't feeling hopeful. It had a very cute romance. There were some quotable lines in that book. The writing is beautiful. I'm very excited to read Casey McQuiston's new book. The Star Side of Bird Hill was an I Got Issues book. It was a Bashman Book Club pick set in Barbados. Middle of the road pick. You could tell it was written by somebody who did not live on the island. There were certain elements of like the dialogue that I was like, this was written by somebody who doesn't like. There's a certain way you'd say that, but I enjoyed the story itself. It was very beautiful. It's very literary. Next up, we have Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare, which I could not tell you that I was expecting to read this year. This would go in bust-it level for me. I think like it's about pretty people doing things. That was all I needed at the time, and that's all I need from this series, to be honest. And I will be continuing this series, which is weird for me to say that I'm going to be continuing Cassandra Clare series because I just did not like the first Mortal Instruments series at all. Sirius Blooms at Night is sad level for me. It is stunningly written. It was one of the other, like, just below A History of My Brief Body for me. I will probably read it again because, like, once you get to the end, you realize certain things, and the way the character sees the world is different, so you understand more of what she's seeing and what the narrator is trying to say. Little Weirds by Jenny Slate was an unexpected read for me, but it was like a bust-it level read? No. I think it's like a bust-it level read. It's just above mediocre. I really enjoyed the way Jenny Slate told her stories. I picked this up in LA and it feels like a very LA book. Like when you're reading it, like it was a good way to continue that trip for me post, like when I returned. I feel like I need to reread it at some point and I might enjoy it more on a reread. And I do feel like I could reread it because I vaguely, I don't really remember much about this book. I just remember that I enjoyed it while I was reading and thought it was very cool. And unlike anything I'd read by that point. Akata Witch is an I Got Issues book. I enjoyed it while I was reading it, and then we got into our discussion and we were talking about the elements of the story that didn't really click with us, and we discovered like there was more to it than we were initially thinking about before we got together, which is like the whole, like what I love most about a book club is that we like when we're discussing, we see things from a different perspective, and then it's able to inform our own decision about like the stories that we're reading. And yeah, it's like I thought I was going to continue this series, but now I don't know with this distance if I'm going to. Mexican Gothic, bust it level. I've gotten over my fear of mushrooms again. I'm able to eat them again. But I really enjoyed this book. It was the first time in a long time that I read anything like with Gothic tropes in it, and it was very well done for, like, because it is a Gothic horror, there are certain elements of a Gothic horror that were present, and they were very well done, very well executed, and I really enjoyed the story. I thought it was, like, very well written. I could not put it down while I was reading it. Love Poems for Anxious People is a Where With Who, because I truly do not remember this book at all. It's like a poetry collection, but I do not remember reading it. I had the author's second collection, Love Poems for the Office, and I'm hoping I remember that one more. But yeah, it was also read during that time where I was just trying to catch up on my reading goals. We've Always Been Here is a bust-it level for me. I really enjoyed reading it. It is a memoir, and so it's hard to critique memoirs. Like, the writing style is specifically what you can critique, and I really enjoyed the way Summer writes. Shame on Me is sad level. This was the first time that I felt my Caribbean identity, like, as a biracial person, was explored in such, like, a nuanced way. This is another book that I'm definitely going to be rereading in the future, because I remember I was listening to this on audio, and every other page there would be something that I needed to, like, pause the audiobook, find my physical copy, and highlight, because it was so well written. And I just really like this author's exploration of multiracial identity in the Caribbean, which is present because of just our culture and the history behind why there are so many multiracial people. Like, it just... I love this book so much. Brother by David Cheriandy is Busset. Let's just get it up there. It's Busset level for me. This is my second time reading David Cheriandy's work, and I'm like a huge stan. I feel like I've read a lot of sad books last year. I'm reading for serotonin. Me also reading like a shit ton of sad books. Eden Robinson, we all know. We know. I did like a full video about this. It goes all the way to the top. It cured my seasonal affective disorder. I really enjoyed reading this for house salt. I'm glad like Maddie jumped on the Eden Robinson train. That makes me so happy when somebody new discovers her, because she is just a joy of an author herself. So the final books are the Hunger Games series. So I'm just gonna bring my computer closer to me. We're just gonna do this. First book is Cured My Seasonal Affective Disorder. Mockingjay is Busset. Catching Fire is 100% Cured My Seasonal Affective Disorder. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is Please Leave Me Alone, We're Sleeping. 100%. We know how I feel about that book. Here we are at the end of my video, a full hour later. Editing this is gonna be a bitch. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll see you when I see you, and until then, stay safe.